right, so it's time to do a Savage review, Savage thoughts. This tier went really quick, so I've been getting a lot of the same questions about the different fights. Is it fun? Is it too easy? Yada, yada. Everyone's been asking the exact same questions, and I'm sure you'll see that plenty in the chat while I'm doing this. Before I actually review all the fights, the way I feel is almost irrelevant in a sense, because I'm speaking from like the most top end, like, you know, people who go to clear day 1, day 2, you know, whatever, versus judging how the tier will actually be as a whole. So I kind of have to judge it 2 different ways. I actually like when the Savage tiers are done relatively quickly. 2 days is ideal, 3 at the most. And that's usually saved for like the 2nd or 3rd tier, because I already know the slugfest of Ultimate that I'm going to get into later in this year. And I want to save as much of my mental tolerance for this game as I can. Endwalker proved that lots and lots of long progs back to back to back to back to back, tier after tier, even if they're months apart, is just, there was a lot of burnout. I know a lot of people who quit rating an Endwalker. I know a lot of people who needed something refreshing. And I think this tier, several teams beating it within, 9 hours or so? 9 to like 15 hours. There's like a lot of clears. I think it's probably healthier overall for the first tier. For those who don't know, the first tier is normally cleared pretty quick. 13 or 14 hours is like a good average for like the first clear. This one just had a lot of clears by the 13 or 14 hour mark. And for a first tier and a new expansion that does some pretty fun things, I'm okay. And quite frankly, I don't even think it's a mechanical thing. I think a lot of it is the tuning. And we'll get into that in a little bit, because there's a lot to say about each individual fight. But with the comfort of the Endwalker jobs, they went a little bit more ham with some of the mechanics, but we know how to play Endwalker jobs. And they didn't change that much. A lot of them, some of them did. A lot of them didn't change that much going into Dawn Trail. So there was a lot less of a post-expansion release learning curve, I suppose. But I'm going to kind of expand upon those thoughts here, because as a PF, I think all these fights are going to be great for PFing for the next several months. I think there's going to be a lot of people who seem refreshed getting back into raiding after the burnout that was Endwalker. And that's kind of needed, because we're expecting just as many progs, if not more progs, this expansion. We don't know about a second Ultimate. There's no word about that. But we know we at least have a large-scale Savage coming back. We know we have one Ultimate coming in a few months. We probably have 2 or 3 Criterion Savage progs again, which, while smaller, still can burn out. They're usually about the same length as this first tier is, if not maybe another day or so. It depends on the seriousness of the group. Well, I guess technically that's only for the Savage mode, like to get the consistency down for it. But we're probably looking at quite a few tiers. So I think this one being short is probably a good kind of just wet the beak kind of situation. But either way, let's get into each of the fights, because a lot of that stuff makes more sense as we talk about it. So we had Black Cat up first. And for the first 2 fights, I really expected them to be very, very similar to normal. These are not more similar to normal than I expected, but both this and... I was going to say, I wasn't sure if it was HD. Both this and the second fight have more similarities with normal mode than I was expecting, only because they normally would make changes to certain things that I wouldn't think needed changes. Like sometimes there's normal mode mechanics where you're like, honestly, if they just put this in Savage, it would be chaos. They actually did that a little bit. With Black Cat, a little less so, but with Honey Bee, there's literally a normal mode mechanic in Savage, completely untouched. Maybe it's a little bit longer in length, that is just as threatening as it was in normal mode. So I think that's hilarious. So quadruple crossing, like this is just to establish that this attack exists, which is a really normal thing for Savage fights. And I'm not going to lie, the very first mechanic of the first fight being 2 near baits into 2 follow-up dodges, it's not a hard thing, but it's rare that you see that be the very first thing that the very first boss comes out with. Like, I'm so used to auto raid wide or auto tank buster that I honestly just assumed that quadruple crossing was going to be, oh, that's just a new raid wide for Savage. And then it was, oh, it's you know, back-to-back near baits with the dodges that come after. And it sets a tone for like stuff you're going to need to do later, because you actually want to get this first dodge down in a particular way that makes the later parts of the fight to actually do. So that was a nice little like a fun bit right off the bat. So honestly, it gets kind of points for that one, and it does make for a not so necessarily free opener. Now 9 lives was a mechanic that they decided to really go ham with here. And this is kind of what I expected, making clones copy. I think I predicted this in my Savage video, like making clones copy her attacks. In fact, this exact thing, this very first 9 lives where she summons 2, I predicted this exact thing. I said she's going to summon 2 clones, and each of the clones are going to do a half room, and you're going to have to dodge the first and then the second. It was one of those, like, I've played this game long enough, and it was super, super obvious to me that that was going to happen here. And then following up with not only either a light party stack or pair stacks, but copying that to remember it for... There's a lot of remembering that for later, double swipe being the light parties. And again, not like that's terribly difficult, but the pacing of the fight right from the get-go is, I think, a vast improvement over, let's say, Eric Toney from last expansion. Eric Toney is a very slow-paced first fight, and that's kind of what I've come to expect. I look back at Alt-Roit and Stormblood. I look back at Eden Prime. Like, is there a lot to pick up when you first go through? Sure, but then they're all pretty slow-paced for the most part. There's a lot of time to kind of, like, stop and do something that you've already done several times before. Black Cat kind of immediately takes all the normal mode stuff and just changes it. And that's good. It's only a little faster paced, I think, than Eden Prime, who is also a very well-liked first boss. Even Eric Toney was pretty well-liked. But just, I think it sets a really good precedent with this one. So we have that. And then, yeah, the movement into the close space. This, I think, is probably my favorite thing that the boss does in this fight, is leaping quadruple crossing, because a lot of people have a hard enough time remembering to do certain things. Like close far baits are another one of those like stack spread memes where people, it's like a really simple thing. Like, you know it, you know what to do, but people just don't think about it in like the boss is moved and I need to do it over there. So it's one of those really simple things you can do to kind of put the players, to kind of let the players know what the pace is going to be for the rest of the fight. And then also having to remember the jump order is also really good here. And like, we even have a death there and we managed to fix it. Oh, okay. Another huge point. People are not a big fan of body checks. And while there are some body checks across the entire Savage tier, we really understood. This is kind of a follow-up to what happens in Val of Garmanda. So this is healer stacks right here on the double swipe. A healer is dead. Instead of instantly KOing everybody because you got like a random second target that was on the group, only the other healer gets it. In Val of Garmanda, it was kind of the same with the fire debuffs on the healers. Like if a healer died or like just they were dead before, they died from the fire stacks didn't just retarget to someone and murder a group. So I think there are places for body checks where you are punished for that. But here, I kind of like that. Essentially, we just had to do our stack correctly. And we even only 3-stacked it. We didn't even 4-stack on our side. And the other group, we didn't have to pray the other group got one, for example. So that gets a little bit of extra points on that as well. So a lot of good design things from especially a first tier standpoint, where your players are not like, they don't hate as soon as like one person dies and the whole thing falls apart. And there was a lot of that in Anabasios, and I know that burned a lot of people out. That's a final tier, so it is normally a bit more body checky, a little bit more like, you know, skill diff situation. But there's a lot of fixing wipes. There's a lot of strength and recovery. So if you're a team that has really confident like rezzers or people who are really good in recovery situations, you can drag these fights out and get clears a lot more easily. And it's just, it feels like it's been a while since having a team that's good in recovery means a clear and not just seeing more of the fight. It could just mean that, but it's nice to at least have that kind of skill option. Mouser here went largely as I suspected. This has like either 1 movement or 2 movement patterns, but they're both like, this was a 2 movement pattern where we had to make sure we ended up on the left one. And that's fine. And then summons 4 platforms. This was less complicated than I thought, but I say less complicated. Again, I always know that it's not going to be, because it's the first fight. It's always going to be easier than I really expect it to be. You know what I mean? But I did like this little variant. So we have either slam or we have knock up when it comes to this one. And I don't know why I didn't predict that. Or at least I don't think I did. Where she can either do like an overhand and just slams on the platform you're on, or the knock-up, which, let's be honest, we were all hoping we got the slam. If you're a DPS and you're getting selected, you're like, please give me the slam. Don't give me the knock-up. Just give me the slam. So you already know people are going to be complaining about which one they get. Not like really complaining, but, you know, they're like greedy. They're like, I don't want the knock-up. I just want to get slammed down. And we actually did something interesting here. We tried to make it so the party had to move as little as possible. So, like, common sense would dictate that you, by the way, you still get stunned when you get slammed down, just not for, I don't think it's for as long. So it's effectively what makes the most sense for people here is tanks on the inside too, regardless of which pattern they're getting, and ranged on the outside too. What we did is we just made it so that almost all of them were on the same side. So like, for example, we're doing these all on the west side of the room. All of the slams, so all the cross AoEs are on the west side. And that way the party can just stay on the east side the whole time. Like, they might need to move over a square to like make room for the square they're on, because they're on the safe square right now. But that's it. Instead of like constantly having to look, oh, that person's standing there, whole party shift over. Oh, like, we just try to eliminate any factor of like trying to constantly shuffle, like flail back and forth. Yeah, less flailing back and forth. So I don't know if that's going to be popular versus having the melees. Because here's the thing. A melee can stand on 4, for example, and go to the one south. They'll land there and then they just gap close back. You know what I mean? As opposed to them starting at 4 and landing on 3 and then just already being in melee range. So yeah, it just, for us, that worked a lot better. So that's a nice little bit of variance and strategy that I always welcome when there are multiple ways to solve. So like, for example, now they're going out there and they have to do the knock back. So you can see we all just get to stand here. And then Whoops has it, and he's gonna go and he's gonna do the 4 to far here. Actually, I think he does 4 to near here. I think just he takes it. But the point is we make it so that all of the crosses are still on the other side. And look, the whole party got to stand here the entire time. I don't know. For us, that definitely worked a little bit better. We had triple ranged as well, so it does make it a little bit easier for us to kind of make that movement here. But yeah, we definitely really like trying to keep the whole party on one side. But that's another big thing is I think every fight at least has 2 solutions to most mechanics, or at the very least, the solutions that people came up with aren't so strict that you couldn't potentially come up with another one. That makes PF strats a little bit too variable, which I don't mind, but the PF does, because the PF loves to argue about what to do and when to do it. But I think it's better fight design when that's even possible in the first place. By the way, this I did kind of predict. The platforms coming back and you needing to know where they're coming back and react to it. This is just quintessential Final Fantasy. That's just, you know, spread, knock back in the spread. Whatever. But okay, what's crazy, and this is probably the most important topic, the boss is at 55.5% right now. This is probably the biggest topic of the raid tier. Is the HP too low? And I think the answer is yes, but not in a way I'm upset about. And that takes some elaboration. So Endwalker was a baby game. When it came to Savages at the very least, they essentially made it so the bosses always had uptime. And because of that, they had to tune things as if you always had uptime. And that meant that they more regularly, I'd say really only P8S was like that. I don't know, P12, we had a Paladin dead for like 40 seconds, like at least in the second phase. The first phase was a little tight, but that's because the first phase was crazy movement intensive. So like, even if you weren't like struggling with uptime there, and most people had some sort of uptime strat there for like most of the mechanics, you still had to like, you were just busy. Like really busy. And again, you shouldn't really compare a final tier to a first. You should really look at P1. P1, I mean, you could skip almost the entire end dartboard to have like 15 deaths and clear P1. You know, P2, I mean, P1S damage down strat was a go-to strat week 1. Like a deliberate screw one of your players, just make sure you resolve the mechanic. And that's like, that was I mean, that's the whole match clip with someone blaming me for that. Was they were just like, oh, that's not how you do it in the happy. I was trying to get people to not do that because it was lazy. And P2, kind of the same deal. You'd usually skip the last few mechanics. P3, we were like 45 seconds ahead of Enrage in P3. And then honestly, P4 with Pnax and like actual people actually doing damage was really the only struggle. Like the second phase, we had a ton of screw ups and we still cleared by the skin of our teeth. But it was like one of our only enrage pulls, I think, that we actually had where like it was a semi-clean execution. So it's like we generally in the first tier, it comes down to how tight is the DPS check on the last fight. Whereas the first few fights are normally very lenient, at least again in the first tier. So I think the only surprise here ends up being the DPS check in the last fight. And I don't want to jump ahead to that, but that's where I think the majority of the time was saved. Is it not really existing in all 4 fights? But this isn't that much out of the norm, believe it or not, when it comes to how quickly first, second, and third bosses were actually downed. But then the rest of the fight just kind of plays on what it already teaches you. And again, I just think this fight does a good job of showing you what it's capable of and then asking you to do it with slight variations. The fight doesn't necessarily repeat. It just takes the things you know and it evolves. I like when fights just do that. To mechanic. Here's the thing we taught you. Now do it in a slightly more complicated way. It will gradually accelerate that. And then this fight does another thing. It also does the what is it called? It does a normal mode choke check at the end. After its last major mechanic, it does a normal mode mechanic that is straight up a choke check. Like it's literally no different than normal. It's just the makes a clone, does the dashes, and then does a half room. And that's it. Like it's just the normal mode mechanic. And I kind of like that they did that for a choke check because it really puts into perspective if anyone was semi-understood the normal mode mechanics. But I love the memorization of like the clone going to here and then having it's just the slight escalation. This fight does slight escalations for a first fight very, very well. So it dying because it doesn't have a lot of health isn't that much of a factor for me saying it's not a good fight. It just means with gear, you are going to be skipping the hardest mechanic. And the hardest mechanic is already cheesable in the PF. Like, it's literally a tank and vuln mechanic. And I think probably the biggest case of tank and vuln cheesing in the entire tier with Raining Cats at the end. And yeah, and then this, just like a slight, like, oh, you don't want them taking the first one. And then you move out for the second one and you make sure you just don't hit them. And there's just a little bit of damage. And then, I don't know. To me, this just works. This just works. This fight just works. This is a fun fight. I really enjoyed this fight. I walked away from it like just kind of content with all the decisions they made. This is where things were a little chaotic on the clear. And this is honestly where trying to keep everyone on the same tile felt way more important. Honestly, the fact that Overshadow is just 1 split damage AoE kind of shocked me. I get that there's only 7 people, but like, I thought they'd do more. But they do more. They just do it with Splintering Nails. And the order is also random. It can be 2 and 2. It could be, the first 2 mechanics and the second 2 mechanics are the same. It could be 1, 3, 2, 4, whatever. And then the boss also you have to react to every time. So like, for example, now we're doing Splintering Nails. So like, while we're doing Splintering Nails, we want to try to stay on this platform as long as we can. We also know we're on the safe platform though. So it's a little bit different. Yeah, so you can see there's kind of like a mad scramble. Trying to keep all of the crosses on the same side. That's kind of the one major benefit to doing it. It's to try to stop that from happening. So that's why I think the way that we did it with trying to force it, it's just that it doesn't work as well when you can't choose the attack. It's not like the same order like it is in the earlier one. But then you just have Raining Cats. And with Raining Cats, we YOLO'd through it, as you'll see right here. Like, we had a plan, we just didn't execute it correctly. Where we wanted 1 near group, 1 far group, but we're too close to the person with the tether. Like, I think we just have 1 person get clipped on the right. So we just needed to, like, move over slightly. Yeah, no, they're too close, so we needed to shift over more. But what groups are doing here, we actually kind of do by accident. So our tanks just took the tethers here and just started just tank invulning them. And we're like, this is when I realized this was a tank invuln. Because here's the thing. You can have your tanks technically be the nearest person, the farthest person, and the people with the tethers for 3 attacks. And the invuln eats all of it. This is what the PF is 100% going to do if it's not doing it already. So then you just do the first set normally. with like the one group on the ring, the other group off the ring, and then the tanks like, I'm sorry, one group in the ring, one group across the ring, and then the other two on the ring, like north, south, and then east, west. And then the tanks take it, and the tanks get in position, and the rest of the mechanic is done. Like, you can just sit both groups on a specific spot, and then just let the tanks literally do all of the rest of the mechanic. So, and keep in mind with gear, this is Cachexia. You're gonna skip this. Like, this is going to be a Cachexia where there is a strat, there is a group, like there is an idea if the group sees it, but if you're in the PF, you're like, please skip it. Like, you're just praying like 3-4 weeks from now that there's no shot your group sees this mechanic. And the rest of the fight's so easy that it's kind of like a within reason thing. Like, people bringing pots, food, people grabbing tome gear, like, it should accelerate it to the point where you don't see it. And the only thing after this is the normal mode mechanic and then the enrage. So overall, I'm willing to say one of the best first fights we've had. I think Eden Prime in Eden's Gate is like a contender. I think they're like similar-ish. I think Eden's Gate loses a bit of that factor because of the cutscene. And I think the ad phase is really lame. I don't think this has a lame phase for a first fight in the expansion. I'm going to say I'm also referring to in each expansion. So I'm comparing Alt-Royd to Eden Prime to Eric Tony to Oppressor. I'm not going to compare Coil. I guess, yeah. And you know, I guess, yeah, throw the snake in there. So, yeah. But compared to all of those, this is up there from like an outright mechanical design like aspect. The DPS check being super light is not a factor because it's always super light for this first fight. So this is a big thumbs up for me. The second fight is where I think there's a question of quality. And that's going to go person to person because I think they actually did a good job with the second fight too. And exactly what I said would happen happened. The majority of the elements people were afraid were going to be chaotic were controlled, except for one. And that one, honestly, might be the hardest mechanic. If you don't have like a really sound strat or you don't have eyeballs, I don't know how. Like, it's just, it's such a time. Like, this starts with like a normal mode check. It does also show you a new honey pattern on the ground, which I think is valuable. But it starts with a normal mode info check. Do you remember what Splash of Venom does? Do you remember what Drop of Venom does? Do you remember what the honey or what the venom on the ground does? The exploding venom on the ground does. Like, that's literally what it is, and that's fine. This is very normal for a Savage fight, actually. I was, again, surprised that Black Cat kind of jumps into an immediate, here's what's different, instead of anything else. Killer Sting being a tank share, whatever. Like, the first, like, 15%. Going into, I also like first beat, second beat, third beat for Honeybee Live. Nice little way of dividing. 4 hearts, we did predict maybe getting more hearts. This was also kind of nice. I think this could have been a little bit more strict or random, but I think because it's only the second fight in the expansion, where essentially it's always, I remember us waiting for this to be an X or a cross pattern, but instead the second hit is always exactly the same. So the movement is either in, directly out, and then shift over 90 degrees and stay out, or it's like out, shift over 90 degrees and stay out, and then move in. It's literally the same pattern, but just in reverse. Those are the only 2 patterns that are there. So that's, yeah, again, that's pretty normal for a second Savage fight. But that's fine. It's a quick, like, it's a quick movement check. It's a quick greed check for your melees. Oh, the melees and the tanks getting extra hearts there. This part's weird. So we honestly YOLO'd this part every single time. We just said, okay, 0s and 1s, prioritize until everyone has 2, and then just the first 2 into a circle gets it. And then the whole point is you want 4 2s at the end of this. And if anyone has more than that, that's no good. I mean, it's not the end of the world, and I'll actually talk about that in a little bit too, because there's something about this phase that they did that I love. Yeah, but we didn't like try to come up with like a plan. Like, I kind of hovered around my quadrant, like as a like a fizz range. I'm normally by the 1 marker. So like, yeah, like here you can see I grabbed one that was next to the 1 marker, grabbed another one that was next to the 1 marker. And then that was just how it is. Yeah. And then this is just me being dumb. I just stopped using my brain there. So ignore me being dumb there. I was just dumb. There's nothing more to it than don't step into that. I was just, of all the polls that we killed on, I was dumb in this one. Because yeah, then you generally want 4 people with 2 here, but it's not even the end of the world if that's not what happens. And then I didn't even see, somebody had actually already gotten 4 hearts, and then they split the hearts over there. And now they have like a 3, a 1, a blah. Like this is like a very normal mode, but slightly escalated mechanic. But controlling the hearts is pretty easy if you just kind of rotate along the inside. So it's pretty flexible. But the biggest thing that this does, what happens when you fill 4 hearts is probably what you're wondering in Savage. Because I said somebody filled 4 hearts there. You can't move for a few seconds. Yes, that puts you at risk of dying, but it doesn't kill you. It also heals Honeybee Lovely by 1% of her health and gives her a stacking damage buff that makes her finale attack here do more damage. I don't know if it affects the final phase as well, the Call Me Honeys or like anything in regards to the final phase. But as long as you don't get too many of those, it's not that bad. But I love the alternative punishment for a player making too many mistakes. So if one player gets 4 hearts, the phase isn't over. It's not a body check. It doesn't screw you for everything else. And if anything, the fact that they now have 0 hearts makes them able to be a big part of resolving the mechanics to stop anyone else from getting to 4 hearts. They actually become a part of the process of stopping the snowball effect, as long as they don't die because of like an AoE or taking hearts or like whatever. And then, obviously, if you were to die to an under 1% enrage and somebody got 4 hearts, you know who to blame. But I like the fact that they kind of keep you as part of the mechanics and as part of resolving the mechanics. If you do it perfectly, it never happens. If you do it a little bit wrong, you're punished, but they can then stop the snowball effect from everyone else. So it's just a very well-designed punishment for making mistakes. And people, especially in this community, I won't speak for any others, love alternate methods of punishing the player instead of a vuln stack, a damage down, a knockback that sends you off the edge of the arena. Something like that keeps the player relevant to the fight, but still gives the boss some sort of benefit. And I got to give credit. It's just something that works a lot better. And chat brings it up. I was going to say A7 had something similar. A7 punished you technically for disconnects or death. But if a player died, the boss got a stacking damage buff. Now, when the game first released A7S, it was a permanent damage buff. Nowadays, I think it's like a minute. But, not very many people do A7S nowadays. So it's not really that important of a thing. But I got to give them credit. I just think it's good when they come up with methods of punishment that aren't so one note. It gives the fight more personality. And as you've probably heard me say with Viper, talking about job identity versus gameplay identity, I value identity when it comes to design in the game. It shouldn't just feel like you could slap the skin of anything on something you're fighting and it would make the same amount of sense. I prefer when it feels like it's more unique and more tailored to the specific encounter that you're doing. So thematics are a big deal. And that works. She wants people to praise her. She doesn't want to kill you. You're doing exactly what she wants. So she gets a little stronger from that. So, it just makes sense thematically. So remember when I said there's a normal mode mechanic and they realized they didn't need to change anything for Savage? It's this. There are a lot of very good ways to do this mechanic. We actually do a stack mid and bait the first 4 and then start moving. But generally moving from point to point, baiting a few in each spot and then moving afterwards seems to be way better than constantly running around. If you Mario Kart, sometimes the patterns are just bad. Sometimes you have to double back. Sometimes you have to go through the middle of the room. But you need to be able to see that you're doing that. No matter what you do, I think this is eyeballs. Your tank needs to know how to move the boss if you want to actually keep hitting the boss. And your players need to accept that if they can't hit the boss, don't get hit. They're more important than anything. Don't get hit. So you can see, I just piss off in the other direction at this point. And I think I actually take a hit in our clear here. No, there's Nuber? No, all right, there we go. And then I'm just piecing, see how they kind of move the boss, kind of succinctly over there into the corner? And then Zeph just moved it back mid. Like, they actually did. I think Whoops and Zeph actually kept uptime the entire time. Yeah, they did. Like, the movement that he did, he went to that corner, and then they just stayed there and baited them, and then just moved slightly, and then baited them again. Like, look, they're all just, I think, oh, does Keo? Nope, Keo avoids it. They're just all hugged against the wall over there. Like, they actually, and then brought it back mid after most of them were done. They made it seem like it's easy. It does not always go that way, and they had barely any safe spot. But yeah, sometimes Mario Kart works. Keo took one at the end there. He just forgot. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Looks like Whoops took one too as they were coming in because they were trying to follow behind Zeph. So, but the idea was to say, oh, it's because he went out instead of following right in. Did he arm's length? Wait a minute. Did he? Oh, no, he just didn't get sent all the way into the wall. Because I was like, wait, he takes the hit there and then doesn't move. Maybe he gap closed and like it was just so fast. I didn't see it. It didn't look like he did. Keo got sent into the wall. Oh, yeah, he did. He did gap close, right? Oh, yeah, he did. He worms glided. That's right. Yeah, he does worms glide right there. I see it very briefly. Yeah, dude, that's a Giga Chad play right there. If only Keo was on White Mage. But the point is, like, that is a very simple movement to that fight. But this is literally the normal mode mechanic. Like, sometimes, Square, you don't need to cook that hard. You sometimes already did the work. This goes back to E6S. There's the rotating mechanic in normal mode that is not present in Savage. It's completely replaced with a different way of doing the same thing. And it's way easier. Like, the normal mode rotation plus, like, AoEs that you need to avoid, like you need to end up in a certain square during the rotation, is more engaging than what they replaced it with in Savage. Sometimes you just leave it as is. They took out the group Bs that were predictable, the ones that rotate automatically, and the ones that just do the cleaves through the middle. And they just went with what works. That's it. Right into second beat. Just sometimes they cook. And that's it. And then second beat is not much different than first beat. I'm glad they bring back the baited AoEs. This one's very easy to assign like responsibilities to. It's not nearly as like the towers in the first one feeling like super random and how we're just like, zeros do this, ones do this, random, whatever. This one was like, okay, zeros do something very specific. The ones have one of two responsibilities. It's more structured a lot. I also like her having the splash and drop mechanic, but now it's of love and it gives everyone hearts. I just like them taking the thing you already know and just like giving it the thematic of this phase with the love drops like that. I like it. I think it's a fun way of doing things. And then it just goes right into Honeybee. Now I actually forgot how quick this phase is. It's like second beat is like a 30-second mechanic. The first beat is a lot longer. The third beat's also a great deal longer than the second one. It's just like a quick mechanic check to get back to everything else. And then, saving this for later. This is also a nice little taste of coordination. I really like kind of like two players react at a time mechanics with like a slight variation of the mechanic happening every time. So you can see like we didn't really have a plan for this. We just said, everyone look at your like clock spot approximately. Like I looked at one and then just try to go to something in that direction. If nothing's available, then just go someplace else. Like it's quick to coordinate. It's quick to figure out. It's just a matter of making the movements quickly, recognizing that you're targeted, and then just not over or under moving to make sure you don't get hit by the actual group Bs here. And then it's what, a DPS stack and a support stack, I'm pretty sure, that we had here. And that's it. Yeah, you just have to make sure you don't get clipped while you're on the inside. And then just, killer B. Like, there's a lot of ways you could solve that, but we just did, we literally said that once, and we never screw that mechanic up again, pretty much. And there's a lot of that. We took a lot of knowledge from old fights and made it work, even if there's better solutions, just for the sake of week one prog. And that's always good. That's a nice team building exercise that any group will be glad that they practiced in advance. Third beat, not the easiest of the beats. I think second beat's the easiest. Third beat has a lot of like choke checks with the outer stage and center stage combos. Because like if anyone makes a mistake on these, it can be really bad for later. But not the end of the world. The defamations as well. I mean, fortunately, this is just go to your clock spot. It doesn't even matter. And then everyone just needs to know their towers. I've seen a lot of people screw up the movement into their towers and go too slow, though. But this is a nice little, like, mechanic dance that's towards the end of the fight that's not like too difficult. But I mean, it literally never stops. From the second she starts doing the first mechanic here with outer stage, it literally goes outer stage, 5 seconds on defamation, towers, center stage, or whichever, wasn't the first one they used. And then other group, and then it's do the same thing. It's the same dance twice in a row, but the pace of it is very, 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 very fast. And so I quite like it for that alone. And then I just go out to my section, and then it comes back in. And then also a quick memory game in there, because she either has Splash of Love or Drop of Love. So really well paced. This is one of the best paced phases that we have in like all of the Savage, to be honest. It's very similar to something that happens in Wicked Thunder pacing wise. And then you just have quick Tank Buster into a whole new phase. I didn't expect a whole new phase, although honestly with her, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, this is just a lot of like timed AoEs. It's not too unlike a Curtain Call style phase from P4. You have a lot more control over it, and the damage frequency is much, much lower. We have something that's a lot more Curtain Call like later. This really becomes a knowledge mit heal. It's a mild check of like a bunch of different things. So enough is enough. Get off my stage. Also, new voice lines. Definitely welcome for that. Yeah, it's just a quick, like, don't rush. Make sure you have enough healing. Make sure you have enough mit. Make sure you can finish the fight, etc. I've seen a few groups come pretty close to wiping here because this is where, depending on how many full hearts you got. So, for example, she has 2 stacks of her heart buff. That means she's gotten 2% of her health back. So she should be dead right now. We know she should be dead right now. But we have to keep going. And there's nothing else you can do about that. You just got to hit the boss, hit the boss, hit the boss. So I think that they undercooked in some parts of this fights, but the parts where they actually like took the time to thematically flesh a lot of stuff out, they did a really good job on. And I think it's DPS check, unironically, because of the heart failing. If you fail any hearts, the check gets a little tighter here than I think all of the other fights in the tier. Like, that's pretty funny. You know what I mean? Just to think that this fight might unironically be the tightest DPS check of all of them without any player dying. I mean, yeah, they get stunned, they get hearted, they heal the boss, but like on top of that, just the sheer damage value that she's going to get out of having all of those heart stacks, it might just lead to more deaths, which might lead to more problem. Like she can snowball, but like her punishment for death is probably the most important takeaway from this. So also, really fun second fight. It has a few slow parts in there, and I think, again, they probably could have cooked a little bit more with especially second beat, but they do a good job. Now, the third fight, I guess the term undercooked is a little bit of a pun here. I wasn't 100% sure. I actually am rejudging it now, because when I finished this fight, we skipped a lot. We skipped his enrage sequence at the end, so we didn't have to deal with that. But more so, I was trying to think, how do I actually feel about how the prog for this fight went? And I kind of need to rewatch it. I haven't rewatched it all the way through since we cleared. Because while we were doing it, I was having a lot of fun with this fight. And again, the DPS check on this isn't that severe, but looking back at Phoenix as a more recent example, and even Leviathan and like Eden, they weren't that tight of checks either. So like, I don't even care. The Tank Buster being multi-hit, the Raid Wides being multi-hit, he does a lot of damage. Like, he gets credit for that. He actually is like a very damage and I want to say intense, but at the very least, he certainly puts a lot of pressure on you nonstop. Like, he does the Raid Wides, and then he does the Tank Buster, and then he does the cleaves, which all hit really hard into the getting away and either stack or spread. And he has that kind of Phoenix X thing where you have to pay attention to see if it's stack, if it's spread, pairs, whatever. Like, there's enough different elements that just kind of, it's just nonstop. And it's kind of just entertaining to watch. Like, he's done, compared to, especially looking at Honey Bee, he's done a lot of raid damage compared to Honey Bee already. And already like 12%. It's actually like really, really high amounts of raid damage in really short bursts with him. But they're not like, they're actually medium length bursts. So this is unironically potentially the hardest mechanic in the fight. I am not sure how I feel about which way of doing this. So the way this mechanic wants you to solve it is it wants you to knock yourself back to the opposite corner and then take that tower and go towards the center, and then take the center tower and get knocked back behind the boss. we opted to knockback resist by our own choice the first tower, and then potentially the second, and then just run middle, and then do that knockback normally. I started deliberately not taking the second knockback and just like arm's lengthening in such a way that I only took this first one. Because I think taking the knockbacks, at least if you don't have a spell to cast, might make the mechanic easier to solve. We did this so our casters would have a bit more freedom in like choosing how they moved. But it honestly happened so fast that the number of wipes we had to people doing casts was not insignificant. Like if we had to definitely do a few reminders of like, you got to just, you don't finish the cast, just go. Like if your cast lands on like a bad moment during your swift cast, just go. They definitely want you to take the knockback and leave the option open. So I don't know which way, but like you'll see here, like I go to the right, I go to the left here, and I say go to the right, and I just take the knockback mid. I actually went too far there, and then I just take it back. Like it just puts you at such a good distance to solve the mechanic. And so, yeah, I don't know. I don't know which way I would rather do that. I think casters definitely prefer the whole surecast way of doing it. But as a fizz ranged, I just shoot bow. All right, that's it. The other thing is, and here's what you're going to want to do. Put all of your melee and your tanks on one side. Knockback resist, uptime. Like the boss jumps to a random spot, so you lose some of that uptime at first. Like you lose it like as the second tower is resolving, and you have no choice with the third tower. There's a chance that he jumps on top of you and does the murderous miss from your corner as a melee, and that would be lucky. But you can't control that. So there's pros and cons, which again, I like. I like when there's pros and cons to all the design aspects. And then the first doping draft happens very quickly. I was really hoping that maybe hitting Refbot here would be like a raid wide, or he'd like pile drive him or something, and he'd become like a tower. I was really hoping for Refbot's abuse to be a mechanic in some way. So I was a little disappointed. Oh, man. And then he just takes the opportunity to show you stuff that isn't in normal mode, which is, you know, him lighting up here and then doing the quadruple lariat, which means in instead of out. Then quadruple being pairs and octo being spreads, which is still relevant here. Knockback again, which can be knockback resisted, but you probably won't have it if you did it in the towers earlier, so that's worth remembering. And then, you know, that just resolves. Look at that. Such a clean stack. Boop. I always feel bad for melees running back in. Brutal impact, what is it, 6 hits? I think it's 6 hits now and then 8 hits when he dopes again, if I'm not mistaken. Same with the tank busters. I think this goes to 6 hits now and then goes to 8 hits when he drafts the second time. What's the tell for in and out? Fire. He's covered in fire while he's charging. And this was really cool. I really like the chain deathmatch where you have to get hit by one and then solve for the other and then dodge both. This was a nice little change on the whole way the lariats were done. You essentially just stand in the center of the room and just dodge one. But fortunately, and this was really important for us while dodging, if you identify the first safe spot, so like you can, for example, you can see 4 and 3 are being hit and 3 and 2 are being hit. Wait, is 3 and 2 being hit? Yeah, so that means 1 is safe and the opposite's always safe the second time. On this one, I was surprised they didn't random this. Like, in normal mode, they only start randoming them, I think, on the 4th lariat. Oh, no, I'm sorry, on the 3rd second phase lariat in normal mode, I think is when they start randoming it. I think the first one's always opposite and the second one's always stay on the same side. Here, this one's always opposite, which makes solving it much easier. So we see 1 is safe, we know 3 is safe. We don't even have to look at them for the second set. Unless we got Final Fantasied for like 40 pulls. I'm afraid. Like, I'm so afraid we got Final Fantasied for 40 pulls. You have no idea. I'd also like to say, thank you, Square, for making the lariats not where the boss is. So you can melee uptime the entire time during the lariat instead of having 16 gap closers happen back to back to back to back to back to back to back. Oh my god, I was a fizz range, so I didn't care. But watching my melees try to brain that in normal mode, they're just like, this is the worst thing I've ever done in this video game. I hate this. I want to go back. Give me the hitboxes. Do something. I don't know. I hate this. Oh, it was nonstop. But here it's like you still have a lot of movement. There's still a lot of places where you really want to be paying attention to all that stuff. And there's still places that kind of force you out of melee range at the last second. So if you play it too close, you could die, like on the lariats right there. But they're still just... That was the one saving grace, was the lariats not all being the boss at the wall. Like, I wouldn't have minded one or two, but not all of them, you know? This was also really nice, too. So I was correct. I predicted sticky bombs. They give you all wicks on top of your head. This actually took me a while to notice we all had wicks on our head, short wicks and long wicks. So I had to separate to really see it on my small Lalafell. This just took a really quick priority system. We just made this... We treated this like P5S Carbuncle, where the ranged essentially used a priority for, like, the corners, and the melees used a priority for the cardinals. So, like, for example, our... I don't know what the melee priority was, but I think it was, like, the tanks were, like, A clockwise, and the melee DPS were, like, D counter. Oh, no. We didn't do it. We did group 1. That's right. We did group 1 and group 2 because, like, it was group... Oh, yeah, because it alternates like that. Yeah, that's right. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, so we did, like... Because I think it's all in one roll. So I think it's all the supports have the short wick or the long wick, and then all the DPS. Yeah, that's how it was. So we did it so that, like, we paired up with, like, a support. And our support would always have the opposite of us. And we would just do the same prowess. So, like, for example... Keo is my partner, and he's, I think he's a short wick right now. So we were 1 counterclockwise. So he's a short wick, so he can't go to the one at 1 counterclockwise. So he has to go to 4, which is the long wick. So you can see Keo going over there. And now as the long wick, I know I have to go to 1 because I have the same prio as him. So that worked out really well for us. The only scary thing is standing slightly off center mid, because the bombs explode and the players with the fuses are fairly large. So you can see we barely had any safe spot direct. That's like a DSR, like bad pattern safe spot right there. It's definitely better if whoever is the melee in that case takes a step back at the last second, maybe just for a little bit of safety. But I'm sure there's not going to be tons of deaths. In fact, I do see a damage down on Nuber, who tried to, like, hover a little bit closer to the bomb explosions just to be safe and took a damage down there. So, yeah, that's a little bit of safety. And then there's usually tons of space on the second one. It's just down to the melees. Yep. And then Zeph got clipped there. So that's, like, the only problem with that strat is people being too close. I also noticed there's a lot of the times where people are afraid of being too close to the middle because of the bomb explosions. And that makes them step out more, and then they just get hit by the bomb anyway. So I definitely noticed that happening, too. But again, the solution for that, pretty good. And then Quadra Boom, like needing to react to the names and knowing whether it's going to be set. Like, you're not just reacting, you're reacting like 2 or 3 different things. You're reacting to, is he in fire? Is he not in fire? Is it Quadro or is it Octo? And then what direction is he going? So they cooked. I feel like they cooked pretty well. And Fuse Field is, again, it's like Curtain Call Light. This one, okay. This mechanic infuriated me. So there's 4 short fuses and 4 long fuses. And then the rolls, there's just either like all the DPS have short fuses or long fuses, and the other roll has the same thing. We YOLO'd this a little bit. We didn't really want to come up with a priority because you have so long to resolve the fuses that it's not that big a deal. But basically, a player touches a fuse and disarms it and then does a big raid wide. So you have 8 back-to-back raid wides here. That are all just going to go off sequentially, and you just need to resolve it all before they all reach the middle. But the fuses, there's probably a set number of patterns to them, but we literally would just all go to our clock spot, and if our fuse didn't match, we would just rotate like clockwise until we found a fuse that matched. And that wasn't claimed. So, like, for example, if my fuse was long here, the next closest short fuse is over by our caster, but they're already going to claim that one. So I'd have to keep going around, or I'd have to recognize that I can go the other way and get to it a little faster. So, like, that was the only thing that really made sense for us, at the very least. So you can see some people doing some last move. I mean, you saw, look, Keo. I mean, you saw Keo do the movement there. Look at Keo on the short fuse on D. Look, starts running around and looks for an unclaimed one. Finds it literally opposite of me. So it worked. It wasn't that hard. And then we just did D1 through 4, MT. Actually, did we do the healers first or did we do the tanks first? I don't remember. But essentially, we just had a pop prio. I guess I'll find out here. We did tanks first. Okay. Yeah, and then tank again. But, okay, here's my annoyance with this. These fuses are fickle. I literally walked directly over a fuse 3 times and it didn't go off. You have to, like, stand on the fuse for a second to actually disarm it. And that's annoying. Sometimes the server ticks on the fuses are absolutely obnoxious. And we hate them. So, there's that. We actually had, so funny thing, we had someone stand on their fuse really close to the middle of the room and wait. And they died. Because the fuse actually takes another 5 seconds or so to hit the middle of the room after your debuff would have worn off. So the debuff killed them, and then 5 seconds later, the thing they were waiting to disarm hit the middle of the room, and then we all died. So if you are going to stand still and just let it resolve for just yourself, which would only really work for like the very last person and have it be safe, don't. Just be proactive. Be a little proactive with that one. Because you don't want what happened to us happening to you. Yeah, and then you've got Doping Draft 2, which I love this. So this sequence is super easy, but I love this sequence here where my man just starts breakdancing all over the place. This is a little bit of a knowledge check, but he's just, I love this like animation for this Bombarian special. Instead of Barbarian, he's the Bombarian. So this is, again, pay attention to the name. It's always out than in, which actually really surprised me. Followed by the top rope jump. It's so funny. Yeah, he still has a hitbox here during the top rope jump. Bam! And then that's it. So I've never seen the Enrage, but apparently the Enrage is an untargetable top rope jump where he just wipes the arena. He just body slams the arena like so. I've never seen the actual Enrage sequence, but it's that. Just it kills everyone. So that's pretty funny. I really like how animated and fun that one is. But I actually want to count the brutal impacts and the tank busters here. This one, okay, but this fight gets kind of a little, I'm not going to say easier here. Even though he stacks like 4 different things here, it's not really hard. So essentially you have to get hit by the boss and one of the things and then dodge. You know what makes this easy? Actually, I know exactly what makes this easy. It's because the bombs resolve before you ever have to do the mechanic. Like if the bombs were resolving at the same time, you had to get hit by both chariots, both lariats, I mean, and then dodge the other. And I'm sorry, get hit by the boss and one of the lariats, and then also dodge the other one. That would be a lot harder. But because they separate them here, it's actually like almost not even harder than the first. Because the 270-degree AoE coming from the boss is not really a concern. It's just everyone needs to be standing in like a slightly correct spot and then get to the remaining. Because this is also always the opposite safe spot. So, and then this is an animation and knowledge check. So a little bit of a choke check. Oh yeah, I actually want to count these. 1, 2, 3, 4. Is it still 6, 5, 6? It is 8. Okay. That's what I thought because I remember our tanks being surprised at how many times Knuckle Sandwich hit. Because now Knuckle Sandwich also hits 8 times. Which is, you know, a lot. Just look at him go. Bam. 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 Yeah. And what's nice about the other thing is you have to eat the poison. So everyone does take the dot from that. It just doesn't hit very hard. So this is probably the spot that's going to give most people the struggle. We did what we call the marker dance for this. Now, some of you may think, oh, that's what I do every time I join the party finder to find out where my spot is. Yeah, that's kind of what it's inspired by. So essentially, we were trying to come up with all different strats for this, and we opted for what was basically a prog strat, where everyone just goes to your markers and either steps in or out of a safe spot. And that's it. And it like resolved everything pretty much. So like we do this rotation, like completely ignoring much of anything other than just being safe. That's like the only prio. And then as soon as that's done, we all have fuses on our head. So we just step out. Like, so for example, I have a short fuse right here. So I step out and everyone's just in their clock spot taking their fuse just as far away from every other player as possible. And then when the second one goes off, everyone just steps into the next nearest safe spot and does the same thing. So like if where you're standing isn't safe, you like step forward to get into a safe spot. And then it's the same thing again. And that just, instead of like trying to be like, oh, you know, supports are here and DPS are here and blah, blah, blah. That made it way easier. I don't know how that works for the melees. I don't think the melees even lose uptime doing that. Like, I think it genuinely ends up working out exactly the same for them. Because, I mean, I look at Nuber and Whoops. I'm pretty sure they were just doing their own thing there. I know Zeph is just doing his own thing right there. But I'm pretty sure they just chilled and just kept hitting the boss the whole time. So it just worked out anyway. And then just a quick knowledge and animation check, followed by Brutal Impact, followed by, I think, not even a knuckle sandwich. Barbarous Barrage. What is this? Oh, and then this is just the towers again. The only difference with this one is you have to do a half room. He does a lariat at the end. This is the only spot where he's toxic about lariats. And so, you know, it is what it is. You know, you just see him doing it right here. So you have to go into a corner. Definitely a big people going into the wall moment or getting knocked the wrong way potentially. And then just an animation check. I think this is an animation check every time. I don't think this one is always the same side of the room. But that's one of the only like 2 times we saw it. So I would assume it's an animation check and not anything else. And at this point, you're basically at enrage. I think he does this knuckle sandwich. And then he takes this draft, and this draft is the enrage. So he does another one of those like super big things where he does like all the spins and punches and kicks and the out and the in into the like whatever. And then I think he body slams the arena right after that. He just leaves the arena, goes to the top rope and just ends the fight. So this is still probably like 30 something seconds out, which is a little bit closer than even our Phoenix kill was back in Asphodelos. But you know, after rewatching it, I still don't know. Like, I don't know exactly how I feel about it. There's a lot of damage checks. There's a good amount of mechanic checks. There's a few different ways to do everything. There's a few simple solutions to do some of the bigger things. Yeah, I don't know. It's good. It is good. Whether or not I'm a huge fan of it is a different question. I was definitely engaged. I had to do a lot of running around. There was a lot of like different new things that he did from normal mode. Yeah, I think overall pretty good fight. It's not like a wow. It's not like wow, that's amazing. I don't think I'm as impressed with this fight as I am the first 2 and how well they translated from normal to savage. I think this one translated from normal to savage more directly than I thought it would. I thought they were hiding more things. Is I think why I set that expectation myself. So it's like I kind of did it to myself kind of situation, you know? So maybe that's why, because I thought there would be some more like recognizable differences going from normal to savage, and they're not. They really do just add a few things and very cleverly use the normal mode mechanics. So, but overall, they did do a good job with this. They did definitely do a good job with this fight. So this one definitely gets a plus. And then we get to Wicked Thunder. Wicked Thunder is a very strange fight. So we're back to no door bosses. Thank you. Called it, by the way. They did some really awesome things in this fight. Both the removal of the door boss and having the unique second phase, even if it is a wall boss. And on top of that, some of the mechanics that they ask you to check in the first phase are really interesting. I think where it has a bit of struggle, the DPS check is, even for a first expansion raid, very light. And this is where I think they not overcorrected, but overcautioned. So because it's the first tier of an expansion, they generally nerf it by like 10 to 15% from whatever their internal testing is. They also don't normally push the mechanics nearly as hard, but I think there were certain parts of this where I definitely thought they were going to do more. And I think if this was a second or third tier, they would have. And I'll get to that a little bit later. But the DPS check is non-existent unless you screw up a ton. We had a run where we had like, I don't know, I want to say like 7 deaths plus damage downs. And we died at like 2% in rage. That's crazy. And on this clear, we basically skipped about 45 seconds of the fight. I also think the second phase clearly has stuff that maybe they did in testing, or maybe they had in like an earlier design of it that they cut out. There's a lot of spread stack moments that definitely should have been added in there, or at the very least stricter timing on certain things. That it definitely feels like they were worried that Endwalker had people too used to the big hitboxes, so they needed to tone back. And two, that because it's the first expansion, it's the first time they're trying a lot of new stuff, that they should like hold back on the numbers. I don't think this is a result of them buffing jobs in 7.05. While that may have some impact, it wouldn't have 45 seconds of skipping and rage impact. Just wouldn't. Yeah. So, but those two things combined, they add up. All of that stuff combined add up to what is essentially a non-existent DPS check. And the only reason this fight was cleared at the speed it was, I think, is because the second phase doesn't have enough mechanics, and there's nothing even... Like, if the DPS check was kind of tight, this probably would have taken another couple hours. At least another. It would have been like an 11-hour tier instead of a 9-hour tier. I don't think it would have been 13 or 14 hours. But the fight itself has a lot of very, very cool designs. We cleared it in like 13-ish hours, 14-ish hours, I want to say. And the Wrath of Zeus is one of the scariest things, honestly. The raid-wide, just generic raid-wide Wrath of Zeus. A lot of very particular movements to get used to. I was really bad at reading how wide these were, man. I didn't get hit very often, but man, they always made me nervous. Paying attention to the electropes on the outer side of the arena was something that definitely got people a lot, because they always come from the same spot, but I definitely noticed that there was like a handful of taking hits there that probably shouldn't have been taken. A lot of reacting, especially this first part is one of the hardest parts in the whole fight. There's not a whole lot of safe spots. Melees have to take severe downtime moments, or take major risks otherwise. And there's just enough variable to the size of safe spots to where you need to go that it adds up. But that's not the part. It's this. It's Witch Hunt right here, where we had to come up with a really good system, because the safest way to do it is a little bit, just a teensy bit out of melee range. And so our melees had to kind of take risks here to make sure they didn't have to, well, Piercing Talon nonstop. But yeah, so essentially the way this works is there's narrowing Witch Hunt and widening Witch Hunt. Narrowing Witch Hunt, I believe, is a donut AoE. Yeah, narrowing Witch Hunt is a donut AoE first, and widening is a point blank first. And then it alternates every time. So it would be donut, then donut chariot, donut point blank. And then the other one would be point blank, donut, point blank, donut. And then you have to do the baits, which are also in opposite order. So it's either the nearest player needs to bait the witch hunts that you just learned before, or the farthest players. So if you're like in plus farthest bait, that means that the players baiting need to be as far out of the donut as possible while the rest of the party is in. But then when you do the reverse, the players need to be really far out. And then the players that are baiting need to be closest in, because it's alternating the baits from furthest to closest. So because of that, learning it and coming up with a good communication method for it were among the most essential things that we had to do in all of our M4S prog. We eventually came up with a system we called also a marker dance, either party on or party off. If we called party on the marker, it meant all four of the baits, the safe spot would be basically right on the edge of the donut and the chariot. If we did party off the marker, it meant that it was either really close to the boss or really far away from the boss for the entire party. You could call that in the opposite way. But yeah, essentially party off, party on was what we did for it. So for example, with this pattern, it's narrowing and it's nearest bait first. So we have to be in the donut, and the closest players are going to be baiting the witch hunts. So the marker is the furthest point we can get from the donut. So you'll see this is what a party on dance looks like. So all of us here at the second, party on, and then the next two people go, and then the next two people go, and then the last two people go. And that's what it looks like when it's executed really soundly with that particular pattern. But you can see that while we're doing that, we're all just resting. We also decided to do a full rotation and moved the party all the way to the A marker. So there was no chance. Like, we just didn't want the party doubling back. There's really no harm in the party doubling back. That was just what we decided to do. But there are definitely ways to essentially move the party in and out. The big thing is that those witch hunts are really large. So we wanted to just do all of us go to our marker spots and just know when we had to do our mechanic. But we were hitting people next to us. You could also split the party into like 2 different groups and then have them alternate. Like there's a lot of like small adjustments, but the idea is still the same. You know what I mean? So I think this is going to be like a big prog point that people need to get over to get to the rest of the fight. Oh, and in case you're wondering, it goes through tank and vuln. That was the first thing we tried was, why don't we just, listen, it worked in M1. Why don't we just try having the tanks take 3 or 4 of them? No. Square's tired. Square was like, no. We let that work for 1 fight. We're not letting that work for 2 fights this tier. All right. They very clearly did not want you doing that for Witch Hunt. So that means it almost feels like they deliberately let it work for the first fight. They're like, yeah, whatever. It's the first fight. Just let it work for Raining Cats. That's perfectly fine. So yeah, that was funny. That was real funny. But that was honestly, that might have been like the biggest prog of the whole fight. This and one other thing later. But the thing later is like, there's a lot of ways to solve it. But like if we had stopped and really looked at our party list and weren't super tired, we probably would have come up with a better solution. Because honestly, a lot of the next parts are not really all that bad. It's learning what the animations do and understanding how you're going to use the space that you have. So this is where she shoots beams at the cubes. And the more times, she's actually teaching you for the next mechanic as well. The very next mechanic after this is important. She shoots the beams, the cubes with beams. And for each time she shoots a cube, she's supercharging it. So if she shoots it once, it only blows up on its own tile. If she shoots it twice, then it blows up in a 3x3, which would hit the these 3 tiles you see next to it in this quadrant. And so you're just looking for the 2 of them that only got hit once. And then she does a half room cleave to eliminate the other one. So now she does the half room cleave. And then she also has animations, either 4 orbs or 2 orbs. So you have to go to the one that's on the correct side. So there's always going to be one on her left and one on her right. It's never 2 verticals that are safe like this. It's always a left and a right. It could be diagonal. It could be next to each other. It doesn't matter. And then you need to know how to do an 8-player spread in that spot and the pairs. Honestly, the 8-player spread is a little scarier because the space is not super large. So you can see that cube isn't safe. So we have to use these 3 squares right here. And it just means, somebody dead center, corner, 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 corner. Like, that's all it really means. But, man, sometimes it's a little scary. That's it. Sometimes it's just a little scary. Followed by tank and vuln. The Wicked Jolt, we just tank and vuln both times. We didn't see a reason to do it any other way. But that teaches you how it works for the next one, where she gives every player a short or a long debuff and then supercharges you to do the same thing that the orbs, that the cubes just did. This phase actually has a bit of nuance to it. So the shorts are essentially going to get shot 2 or 3 times, and then that's going to determine where they go. That's pretty simple. The longs will get shot 1 or 2 times, but then an AoE she does later adds another charge. So what I like to do is, as a long, I just say, okay, I have 1. And then I get shot once, I have 2. I get shot twice, I have 3. I don't even worry about adding the 1 later. I just add the 1 right here. And that makes sense to me. But the big thing is she's going to do either a spread or pairs. If she does spread, the rest of this mechanic is an absolute joke. If she does pairs, the mechanic becomes a bit more nuanced because the pairs will always target the 4 players with the long marker. So what we had to do is we made partners by default. And then if we couldn't, let's say I'm with Keo. Keo's the scholar. If we were both short duration debuffs, then we can't pair later. So then I need to find a new partner. So then the other healer. What if the other healer is not viable? Okay, then I need a tank. So we ended up just having to essentially people had to check their partner and be like, okay or not okay. And then look down there. We made the supports look down their role. Okay, if I'm okay, then I stay. If I'm not okay, is the next person okay? No? Okay, I'm going to swap with the person in my role. If the next person is okay, or if the next person is not viable, then I have to go down to the tanks. And then every support has to do the same thing, or every DPS has to do the same thing to make sure that the pairs are fine. Now you could probably maybe set it so that like the markers always go to like this, like the people with the pairs always go to the same spot, and then you could have the other people just like flex, because I think it is light parties. I think it's always 2 DPS get short, 1 tank, 1 healer. And then the same for the opposite. It's just a matter of who's going to pair with who and like who has which timers. That was what we came up with for our week 1 prog. But that was the only part. We would start figuring it out, see that it's spread, and go, never mind. So the difficulty difference is quite high between the spread and the pairs. And then you can see there, I got hit twice with the short. So essentially, that square is always safe. Super easy to identify safe spot for the whole party. The 3s are in the corners because the people who got shot 3 times are going to do a 5x5. So they're going to hit all the way to here on both sides, right here and right here. So this entire half of the room is gone. Then we're going to hit here and here. And then there's AoEs here and here. So this becomes the fact that this had such a readily identifiable safe spot and there's no variance to the pattern other than where that safe spot is, where the tip of the T is, it made solving this mechanic much easier. So the pair thing becomes the only thing that's a little bit nuanced. That's literally the only thing. And then like, look here, we're like, oh, pairs, do the pairs work? No, who cares? It's spread. As soon as you get spread, you're just like, all right, nothing matters. It's just funny how like different the two are. Like how the mechanic interacts with the two, depending on what you get. It would have almost been harder to be pairs every time. In all honesty, they might have just wanted to do pairs every time there. Or maybe even like light party plus and like do some sort of like, I don't know, that probably wouldn't have changed much, because how would you determine? And then it would have to be rolls. Yeah. Honestly, the only way to make it even remotely hard is light parties. Then we get to the cannon phase. Cannon phase is probably the second hardest part of the first part. Arguably, it's actually really easy, but getting used to the spacing is a little bit strange. And it's a lot of MIT. It's a lot of damage. It's a lot of healing. Because it's 3 back-to-back. No more of the counting. This is just debuff related, which somebody did call would happen. I don't think it was me, but somebody did take note of the sigils in normal mode and said, like, those sigils will probably do something else. Not quite here, but it is just like there are 2 different functions to 2 different halves of the cannon, which is the relevant factor. So essentially, you have to get hit by the opposite color every time. And it's a wild charge, so the tank has to be in front, or I should say closest to the boss. And then as soon as you get shot, everybody gets a debuff. And there's 2 patterns. There's what we call dynamo pattern, and there's what we call the in pattern and out pattern. So there's going to be either 4 players with a dynamo or 4 players with a spread marker, 2 players with a near shot debuff or a far shot debuff, and 2 players with basically a time bomb. And the only way to disarm the time bomb is for them to be hit by a different attack. And they have to get hit by the players with for example, I have the far marker here. This means I'm going to shoot the furthest player with a conal AoE. They have to be hit by this. So we have to position it in such a way that we can always make sure. We essentially created nearly, not static positions, but the dynamos either all go dead center or the spreads all spread around the middle of the room. We did like DPS closest to the middle, like towards the D marker or the B marker. And then the supports would be like closer to the dead center as long as they're not overlapping. And we always stuck the tethers right where you're seeing us right now, regardless of near or far. And then it was either the players who need to be shot would either go out to the edge of the first square on both sides or just right next to us. And that worked perfectly fine. And then it's just that 3 times, but it is a lot of damage. Sometimes you have to swap sides here. Sometimes you never have to swap sides. You just have to react every time. And you never get the same pattern 3 times. I think it's always, you can get the same pattern twice, and then the other pattern is always different. I mean, it works. There's only 2 patterns. So yeah, if you can't get, that's literally the only other way it can work. But even those can be in any order. It could be like near, far, near. It could be near, near, far, 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 near. You know, you just don't know. And then you can see we're inside of the dynamo and we shot the person closest to us. Getting used to that and the positioning for that took a little bit of time, but for other players, like catching strats on like YouTube or toolboxes, it should be a pretty quick pickup for that entire mechanic. Then it's just about not letting people die and making sure the wild charges are done correctly. Then we come to the fun part. So that's like what most people would consider the door boss, but we don't have an actual door boss for this boss. It is all one long encounter. I think it's about 13 minutes long. And while this next section is not terribly difficult, it is actually really cool because we get to play through the boss transition. It's a very simple phase. You just dodge 7 of these conals. You dodge the first one, and then you always dodge back into the safe spot from before. So you see us just go back and forth like this. And then there's, on the 5th shot, one of the two, like either all 4 DPS or all 4 supports are going to get shot, and they get a magic vuln, and then somebody needs to stand in front of an AoE and block for them. So like, boop. So you can see like I got shot right before that, and now my tank is standing in front of me taking the shot. And then we still need to dodge. With this, honestly, the hardest part of this fight, not that dodge. Remembering to dodge the 7th cone right here. Because this is AoE number 6, and then you just got to step back into AoE number 7. Another really important bit, if you're inside the hitbox here, you're dead. These AoEs that are being blocked, they are wide enough to kill you if you're in the hitbox. Like, you'll get hit by more than one. So that is another important bit. So don't get too close to the boss. You can, however, still get full melee uptime if your ranged are quick enough. So you can see how big the AoE is when I get shot by it. So we can't be super close to each other here because look how big it is. Like, there's like a few steps leeway here. You can see like even over here, there's like a few steps leeway, but you can't be like super close and then like block for the other. So it can be quite a run for the range. Like for example, you see that like they have to step in for safety's sake. We have the other person step out, but it is possible to make it in. It is also possible for the melees to get, to be safe literally every time. And maybe just the healers need to move, but it's just a fun little factor. Like technically the tank I'm with, if I have to block for him, he never has to actually leave melee range. As long as I'm close enough, I'm quick enough to get in front of him, and he's not overly close to the boss, so I don't have to go in the hitbox. That's about the only thing. So, and then you just repeat that twice, but the boss is just doing its transition the entire time. So we actually play in DPS through the transition. Stuff like this would be way more important if the DPS check was tight. Like actually doing well during this section and making sure not to lose uptime. If the DPS check was tight, you would look at this phase a lot to try and make sure that everybody is like taking kind of the easy phase and optimizing on it well. And then this is where your 2 minutes are. Your 2 minutes like happen as the mechanic's ending. And with the length of this fight, I think you can technically hold, but we just decided to send them here and just basically get almost our entire 2s. I think we lose one GCD of our 2s there at the end. And I guess if we even did like speed 2s at the start, maybe we wouldn't even lose that. But that goes into the second phase, and we have the boss at 45% already. Like that was like 14% of the boss's hit health points. So again, it just went really quick. This is a lot. So cross-tail switch is harrowing hell without the tank needing to block the damage. It's literally just like 9 back-to-back ridiculously hard-hitting hits. And your choices are literally save every single mitt and stack everything you could possibly put on this while also spam healing, or put a little bit of mitt on it to cover some of the hits and tank LB. And you tank LB, you can't tank LB every single hit, but you can tank LB almost all the hits. Now, in case you're wondering, this has been done without the tank LB. It is not intended to be a tank LB mechanic. However, the DPS check is light enough. Just tank LB it. I promise you, your life will be easier if you just tank LB it. So I would recommend you, honestly, you can tank LB whenever. I'd say maybe the first or second hitting the party is fine. You want to almost be using it basically as the cast bar finishes. So like not before. So like we use it right here. So the button gets pressed as the hotbar disappears. And you can see we still take a ton of damage. See, we're tank LB, tank LB, tank LB, tank LB, tank LB. And then on the last hit, we don't have tank LB, but we're fine. So that makes it okay. Immediately followed by X's. Now these X's look really scary. They're not that scary. So essentially on each side, 3 of the X's are going in the opposite direction and 1 X is going towards the other team. your job is to find out which of the other team's X's are just leaving the arena. I'm sorry, 3 of your X's are going towards the other side and 1 X is leaving the arena. So you essentially just stand. You can stand here. You can stand in the middle. The party agrees to stand in a spot. We both agreed to stand like forward most instead of like mid center. You can even adjust it. Like if you identify before the stack spot and you just like go stand next to it, you can make this a one tick movement every time. We've never had it be the back one either. Interestingly enough, Aloha, come on, we almost got through the whole thing without you being annoying. We've never had it be the back one either. We've only had it be the front 3. And you know what? You know what that tells me? They were thinking about the melees. They were thinking about the melees. Definitely thinking about the melees. So yeah, you can see that on the other side, this is the only one. This one right here is the only one going out. So we know that's our safe spot. On the other side, they can see it's this one. So they're here and they're going to need to double back here. For casters, that can be a little scary. If you undermove at all, you will die. And we do actually take a death here from our Pictomancer. So like when they're going to step back, you can see that Picto tried to finish a cast and is lagging behind. And they do not make it. Now keep in mind, if a healer dies during this, it will retarget the other healer. The gloves they pulled in the first fight where they made it so it's only one. No. If your healer dies, it goes to the other. And it doesn't go to a random target. Every single time we've done it, it's gone to the other healer. Because we've had this screw up like, okay, to be fair, still confirmation bias. But every single time we've lost a healer, the other party has died. Every single time. And it's happened, and we've had quite a few while we were learning it. So take that as you will. In other words, the AoE doesn't stop. So you're not out of the woods, is all I'm saying. The Picto dying, though, not a big deal. And then it's just a few multi-hits. And so you know what's crazy? Look how big this is. So this is so large that on one pull, our healer was here. And we were here because he saw that this was going to be the safe spot. And it still hits us. Like, that's not like it literally reaches to the next safe spot over. So if you want to be won over to make your movement easier, you can absolutely do that. Just as a note, because these are massive, these X's. And you can see it a little bit more clearly there at the end. And then this is just in or out. Wicked Special is always just... So, funny thing. The middle, you can see that you can use the squares on the ground. For the sides, it's actually only one inner square. I mean, it technically makes sense because it's only one square on the sides that are safe. But for the side hit, it's actually like the very middle row. Like, see, like right here, it's like right here to right here. And not like from here to here. So, worth mentioning that because you want to be like as close to the actual middle. Then you have Mustard Bomb. Mustard Bomb was kind of a weirdly placed mechanic. It's 2 Tank Buster tethers that give the tanks an explosion afterwards. And because they have magic vulns, they need it taken off of them, in theory. Technically, you could just invuln it. And then 2 players don't get hit by spread AoEs, and those 2 players... So you can see that it's, I think, Theo and Nuber both don't take AoE, so they step forward and grab it off the tanks. I don't really like our positioning for that. I think you can like wrap the players, like you can conga line the players basically, or like wrap them around the tanks here. Like we could have put somebody here, here, here. Like we could do it all in the front 2 rows. There's no reason to go to the back rows and make the range. Like I'm all the way in the back. If I get selected, it sucks. Like, I would recommend just using the 8 front rows here and just, like, sticking the melees on the side, like, out a little bit more, and that should be fine. The tanks go, like, a little closer in just for safety, and, yeah, that's a way better way. I would already not do it the way that we're doing it here. And honestly, I don't know why we landed on this way. Maybe we saw somebody else who was already here do it that way, and that's why we decided on it. Okay, so Ethereal Conversion is the number one mechanic I think they pruned for it being a first tier. So she either stocks a back-to-back fire AoE to get away from or water knockback. You can't convince me there weren't at some point spread, stacks, or pairs as part of this mechanic. You simply cannot convince me that was at not one point a thing in development. Because it screams it. Because on its own, it's a nothing burger. It's a normal mode mechanic. Like, not even just like, it's not even a normal mode mechanic. It's like a story trial, like, normal mode mechanic. Like, it's a memory, later it's a memory check at worst. But, like, that definitely had spread, stacks, or something different. You could tell, like, the hitbox is big enough that each of the tentacles landing could fire a conal AoE at every player, and you would be fine. Like, the knockback would be really toxic, but at least on the fire one, like, the knockback could just be into, like, light parties or something. I think they pruned that for it being the first tier. That's, like, the biggest case of I think they pruned it. And then there's also a lot more sections of just, oh, by the way, the autos. Oh my goodness, dude, the autos in this fight. So it looks like they're not hitting our tank very hard here. They hit him for like 50k. I have watched these auto attacks. Oh, like our tank was asking for our raid mitt early to like, for these autos. Because you could raid mitt now and it'll still be up for the raid AoE that's coming out. It was like, mitt now. And it was just, when we didn't, I've watched his entire health bar go in like 2 auto attacks. So they hurt. They hurt a lot. Leave me alone, phone. Everything trying to interrupt. This AoE, by the way, Azure Thunder, also very painful. Very, very painful. Then you have the circle phases here. And this is kind of a callback to phase 1 because she summons a bunch of clones of her with wings or cannons. So this is actually the normal mode mechanic where it's the half rooms. So you can see them. And then there's also baited AoEs in the middle. So we bait these, and the way we did this is we looked at one and dodged to that half, and then just did the other half as we were moving out. So you can see we move over to 2. Somebody moves over a little bit. They don't move over enough. They were using the other one as a measurement. And then it's just, you got to look at the second one. And then it's in or out. So this is a good example of the in. So you can see the in here hits to about there, and then the other AoE hits there. So that gives you a good idea of what the in looks like for trying to dodge all that versus the out, which is like really all the way out. And then you have the pair mechanic. I've seen a lot of people panic over this, and there is actually a good amount of reactions that are required for this one. So this is 2 sets of 4, either laser or donut AoEs, or the Bahamut wings, I guess I should say. Which one is first? Either cardinal or intercardinal is random. Whether it's the cannon or the Bahamut wings is random. And then the boss's cast bar is either pairs first, spread second, or spread first, pair second. So it's not a lot of movement. It's just a lot of like quick, are you paying attention checks? So like it's concentrated burst, so you know it's pairs first. We saw it's cardinals are firing lasers. Now keep in mind, you could get a situation where like cardinals are lasers and intercardinals are donuts. And then you have to stay where you go for the first one instead of rotating around. Sometimes you have to rotate, sometimes you have to stay. Sometimes you have to go counterclockwise. Like there's just those slight variations. So this is a pretty well done, like really short section right here where it was pairs and then spreads. And we just had to do it. Like that's kind of the most basic looking one, followed by one last boss health bar, Wicked Special, staying out all the way along these outer edges. And yeah, just a nice little check, followed by another raid wide AoE, which quite a few back-to-back raid wides. That's always fun. A little scary. Good thing the half room AoE section doesn't actually do it. And here's a saving this for later moment. Just a quick knowledge check. Fortunately, you just have to remember the order because she actually glows with the element. And then you have what is one of the strangestly easy mechanics. Like people still get hit and a lot of it's melee greed, but like this is a strangely easy mechanic for a savage. So there's 4 swords on each side, and they chain lightning one after the other. So she's charging the first set, and she charges 3 on each side with each set. So only one of the swords is safe. So you can see she's chain lightning, and it's just like the bounce. And every sword can only be safe once. The rate at which they chain together is not very fast. This is a mechanic that if it was the second or third tier, it would either A, be really fast, or B, you would potentially be able to get the same safe spot more than once, instead of it being each safe spot is only once. So what we did for this is in comms, we had the right side call what they were doing, and the left side typed in party chat what they were calling. According to my what's it called? My Twitch chat, you could just type in say. Apparently each side is far enough apart that you can't see each other say chat, which is a surprise to me because it doesn't look like it's that far apart. And that would also work, but it's also just really easy to keep track of. So it's like, I don't know. This is another, like, they clearly toned it back for normal. Like, look at this. Look at how much time we have. And like, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, I think. So we got the easiest pattern to boot. Like, look how much time you have. You have like 1 billion years. An actual and then of course Melee, like, oh, hold on, I got this. Trying to abuse the snapshots. Immediately into the remembering the tail thrust, which the knockback tail thrust here. So there's like these little red dots that you can kind of like barely see, like right here. See that little, like, it's really hard to see with all the other effects. There's a little red dot right here. That's the center point for the tail thrusts. And trying to line up around it without getting sent off, a little nerve-wracking. It's not that bad, but a little nerve-wracking. Immediately into a mustard bomb. So, and then this mustard bomb is the same as the other one. Just, again. So there's not much to say about that. I mean, there's a lot of back-to-back stuff, but it just feels like there was like so few overlapping mechanics and so many, like, you have a lot of time to do the mechanics here at the end, that the entire last bit kind of feels like its own choke check. Except for this part. This part being right at the end before you go into the kind of, it's kind of like a big attention, the actual choke check mechanic, which we skipped entirely. This is the hardest part. So we went with a conga line strat here. Even though we had noticed that this was roll-based, we went with, like, we basically did what we call the Pangenesis strat, where we had the short debuffs go either front or back and then left the longs in the middle. So, like, for example, like, there's one extra person back here because of our pull. But you can see, like, we had the two of one debuff go forward and the other two go back. And then we just had, like, a prio system for this. However, roll pairs makes way more, like, we noticed that these were roll pairs. And I guess we were just so tired, we just didn't plan around roll pairs. Because I remember suggesting doing, like, northwest counterclockwise for one roll and north clockwise, and we just didn't do it. I think multiple people suggested it. And then when we did the Pangenesis one, I mean, it worked for us. That's great. There's no problem with that. The only way that we did this a little differently is the second. So there's essentially you have to bait the opposite laser, which we decided to bait away from where the towers are, which is where the Bahamut wing ones are looking and jumping. And we found this to be way easier than aiming them across the room. I don't know why we tried the across the room strat as many times as we did, but it's just get really close to the wall. And you can see I have like a couple of steps here where I would have been safe. And we just blast while the towers take their hits. What we ended up doing, because we were doing the conga line, is inside of the towers, both of the people with the debuff would stand next to each other. And that was their own conga line. Essentially just kind of achieving a mini conga line. And then it does the same priority as this. And then we just had, like, the blues are like east and south towers and the yellows are north and west. Like, it's one of those things where we solved it in a way that makes a lot of sense. Everything is logical, but we could have just done rolls. It's one of those big things in Prague where you just either stop thinking about a certain way a mechanic works and don't consider the easiest option, and just go with something that your group is able to grasp immediately. But then you feel like, wow, that's stupid. Why didn't we do that before? That's me with roll pairs, because I know we talked about doing it. Fortunately, the way we did it worked perfectly fine. And then it's just in or out, which is just a quick attention check on the boss. And then same deal. They have their little system right there. So they just all instantly go. And then we have our system. And it works just fine. Like that was great. Like you even have time to do another conga line in the middle. Like even if you don't want to do it in your tower, it all makes perfect sense. But we could have ignored all that and just unroll pairs. Fortunately, that strat worked for us. And then remembering the tail thrusts. I think we had right then left, and I think we'd lose a healer. But look at that last. We don't even LB3. So at this point, how many minutes into the fight am I? I guess I want our actual kill time from like pull to death. I want to know exactly how much time we had left. So Sword Quiver is the start of like a 3-part soft enrage. Bam! 163k. Where each of these slices does a lot of damage. And then you have to break off into support DPS pairs. And there's 3 times back-to-back, 3 different patterns. It's a different pattern every time. And then the enrage cast. And we just skipped all that. We just didn't do it. And we didn't tank. We could have just tank LB3 the second set of lasers. Like we could have just demolished it. And instead we ended up just absolutely massacring here at the end. And we killed it at what? There's 71, is it 7147 by the time we clear? You know, yeah, my group has this. Yeah, it's 7147. Our kill time was like 12 minutes and 33 seconds. 12 minutes, 30 seconds. That's like a minute. A full minute ahead of Enrage. That's wild. That's just absolutely wild. Like this is the only place where I think they were too cautious. Because I think the DPS check of the 4th fight, even if it's not ultra tight, still is usually tighter than that. And while I don't think that makes the fight worse, it's just unfortunate to see. Because we had deaths. We had damage downs. We had unoptimized strats. I clip a song or like miss a dot or like, and I'm sure other people are making like little, we have 11 piercing talons. 11 piercing talons in this fight. And we're a full minute ahead of the Enrage at this point. That's nutty. Chad put it the best way. I'm not heartbroken about it. And nor does it really change how much fun that I had with the fights. But these bosses are going to disintegrate. I'm glad that for the most part, it's really simple stuff that we're skipping. Like this is literally just a bunch of slashes, but this is actually really important. The choke check is a really important bit of Savage Prog because whether you die or you just lose enough damage during the choke check, it's one last little thing that you have to do in order to, how do I put it? It's that last little push that gives the kill adrenaline. And the adrenaline here was not needing to do it. And so I think this is undertuned. And I think that in future weeks, the expectation of skipping, like you're going to skip lasers and cannons with all weapons. In Bisgear, you will never see lasers ever again. Ever. So that's not good. That is, I think, is a lapse in balance and one of the more major ones. And I only really feel it here and a little bit in M1. So while I applaud them for trying a lot of new things, I think they did make a lot of very fun fights. I don't think there's a stinker in the 4 fights, which is good. You want that. It makes PF more fun. It makes farm better. And honestly, even these kill speeds make farm more fun at times. People might be willing to try some riskier things, experiment a little bit more with uptime and try some stuff. Maybe even try roles they're not 100% comfortable with because they don't have to really worry too much about it. But I do think that it sets an unfortunate message. Because here's the thing. Now when Ultimate comes around, if it's like this again, that's a problem. But if it's not, people are going to, before it even comes out, people are going to be like, oh, you know, you're going to beat each phase in Ultimate like 40 seconds in advance, like 30 seconds. Like essentially the idea of an Ultimate not having it, people are just going to like project it onto it. So leading up to it, it's going to actually affect the way people meme. And some people meme and other people take it seriously. So that's a problem. Number two, if the next tier is really strict, the swing for people who get into rating this tier and then go into the second tier and get something closer to what is like an actual enrage check. There's gonna be some people who are very surprised at their performance not being adequate enough to beat an enrage in like week 1 or something like that. So there is the concern of swinging too much back in the other direction in the second and third tier. So whether or not they're valid concerns is a different talk entirely. But at the very least, I'm glad encounter design wise, they're having fun. Both in the animations and the thematics and the music. The music in the second phase is pretty awesome. But there are concerns. Whether I don't really care at the moment. I'm just going to observe the future tiers as they are and not kind of going with the expectation. I don't think this tier is supposed to set expectation for the rest other than the actual thematics and like the design choices that they've made. And those they did a good job on. So as long as the design choices for the fights are good, my optimism is higher than my pessimism. And that's just been the case with Dawn Trail. So like Valor Garmanda's not hard. Like, is it really fast and fun during the fire phase? Sure. Does that make it hard? No, it's just that in isolation is a really well done mechanic in an extreme trial where we don't normally get that kind of fast and frantic and constant damage and healing and debuff after this, after, you know, tank blast conal thing. Like it's a lot of constantly moving parts. Zoral Jaw, on the other hand, is a more, it's very thematically cool, but isn't stressful in a lot of other ways. So I think they're just kind of flexing design more than anything else. And I'm going to hope that's the case. But man, if the second tier is beaten this quick, I mean, at the very least, I'll only have to prep food for 1 day again. That's nice, I suppose. But there is that it's concern. It's a valid concern. It's a valid criticism. And we'll have to wait and see. But I think everyone's going to enjoy the fights. I think that PF will enjoy the fights. I think farming won't be that bad. So that's going to be good. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But those are my thoughts on the tier. I'm sure this won't be the last time I'll talk about it. We'll talk about it on State of the Realm and everything. And I'm sure I'll be asked about it nonstop in stream anyway. So the fact I'm recording the video is at least, well, something, I suppose. But anyway, yeah, I'm going to get back to actually playing 14, which as you can see has AFK locked me out in the background. And we'll revisit this topic. I got to start working on the guides and everything too, based on my week 1 experiences with it, and see what everything was. See what I want to do is see what I want to change even in our week 1 strats. It's going to be really cool. So all the same, thanks for listening to me ramble on about Savage for the last like 2 hours. Appreciate it. Appreciate your patience. Cheers.